Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel where we tell the most powerful stories from history. Stories that light a fire in your heart and help you learn English naturally. Today, I am going to tell you about a boy who was born a slave. A boy who was told he was nothing more than property. A boy who was beaten, starved, and treated worse than an animal. But that boy had a secret. A dangerous, illegal, and burning secret. He wanted to read. And in a time when teaching a slave to read was strictly forbidden, when just holding a book could get you whipped or killed, that boy taught himself. Not only did he learn to read and write, but he became one of the greatest writers, speakers, and leaders that the world has ever seen. His name? Frederick Douglass. How did a child born into chains become the man who would stand before presidents and demand freedom? How did his words shake an entire nation and help end slavery forever? This is a story about the incredible power of the human mind and the truth that knowledge is the key to breaking every chain. And as always, this story is a powerful way to improve your English. With clear, engaging storytelling, helpful vocabulary, and timeless life lessons, you will learn naturally while you listen. Now, let's begin from the very start. Frederick Douglass was born in the year 1818 on a large plantation in Maryland, on the eastern coast of the United States. He did not know his exact birthday. Slaves were not told such things. They were treated like horses or cows, valued only for the work they could do. A birth date was a celebration for free people, not for property. His mother's name was Harriet Bailey. She was a strong, intelligent woman, but Frederick barely knew her. The cruel rules of slavery meant that children were often taken from their mothers at a very young age. When Frederick was only a few weeks old, he was sent to live with his grandmother in a small, wooden cabin far away from his mother. He saw her only a handful of times at night, when she would walk 12 miles just to hold him for a few hours before walking back before sunrise to work in the fields. By the time Frederick was 7 years old, his mother was dead. He stood by her grave with no tears left. He was alone. The plantation was a place of constant fear. The owner, a man named Captain Anthony, ruled with a whip in his hand. Slaves were whipped for working too slowly, for speaking too loudly, for looking the wrong way. Frederick saw these horrors with his own young eyes. He watched his aunt receive terrible beatings. He heard the screams at night. The pain of those early years never left him. But even in that darkness, a small spark of hope was waiting. When Frederick was about 8 years old, something unexpected happened. He was sent away from the plantation to the city of Baltimore. He was given to a new family, the Aulds, to serve as a houseboy. The master's name was Hugh Auld, and his wife's name was Sophia. Sophia Auld was different from anyone Frederick had ever met. She had never owned a slave before. She was kind and gentle. She saw Frederick not as a piece of property, but as a child. And in the beginning, she did something that was both simple and revolutionary. She began to teach him the alphabet. She taught him the letters A, B, C, and D. She taught him how to spell small words. Frederick's heart was on fire. A door had opened inside his mind. He was hungry to learn more. He practiced in secret, tracing letters in the dirt, on the walls, in the pages of a stolen book. But when Hugh Auld discovered what his wife was doing, he was furious. "You cannot teach a slave to read," he shouted at her. "If you teach him to read, he will become unhappy with his condition. A slave who can read is no good to his master. He will want his freedom." Frederick heard these words, and instead of frightening him, they changed his life forever. He later said, "That very moment, I understood the direct pathway from slavery to freedom. It was literacy. If reading made a slave unfit to be a slave, then reading was exactly what I needed. From that day on, Sophia all changed. The kindness in her eyes grew cold. She became strict, suspicious, and angry. If she caught Frederick with a newspaper, she would snatch it away. She stopped teaching him completely. But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and nothing was going to stop Frederick from learning. With no teacher and no books allowed, young Frederick had to be extremely clever. He turned the streets of Baltimore into his classroom. When he was sent outside to run errands, he would put bread into his pockets. He would find poor white boys playing in the streets, and he would offer them a piece of bread in exchange for a reading lesson. "Teach me that word," he would say, pointing to a sign or a piece of paper. "What does that say?" The boys, hungry and playful, did not understand the deep meaning of what they were doing. But Frederick did. Every word was a brick taken from the wall of his prison. Slowly, he built his ability. He learned the alphabet perfectly. He learned small words, then bigger words. He found a copy of a book called The Columbian Orator, a collection of powerful speeches about freedom, justice, and human rights. He read it in the dark, hiding it under his clothes, reading by the dim light of the moon. One passage in particular burned into his soul. It was a dialogue between a master and a slave, in which the slave argued so brilliantly that the master had no choice but to set him free. Frederick read it again and again. He whispered the words to himself. He practiced speaking like the characters in the book. He was not just learning to read. He was learning to think. He was learning to argue. He was learning to dream of freedom. But with knowledge came pain. For the first time, Frederick fully understood the injustice of his situation. He understood that he was a prisoner in a country that called itself the land of the free. This knowledge brought him deep suffering. "I envied my fellow slaves for their ignorance," he later wrote. "I have often wished myself a beast." The struggle for freedom was a heavy burden on my young heart. But he did not let the pain destroy him. He let it fuel him. He made a decision. One day, he would be free, no matter what it took. When Frederick was a teenager, his life took another dark turn. He was sent back to the plantation, away from the relative freedom of Baltimore. He was now seen as a problem, a slave who had been ruined by learning. His new master sent him to a man named Edward Covey, a known slave breaker. Covey's job was to crush the spirit of rebellious slaves. For 6 months, Frederick endured some of the worst treatment of his life. Covey worked him like an animal. He was whipped almost every week. The beatings were brutal. Frederick was exhausted, hungry, and broken in body. One day, after a particularly savage beating, he ran into the woods, bleeding and sick, and wanted to die. But something inside him refused to give up. On a hot summer day in 1833, Covey tried to beat him again. But this time, Frederick fought back. He grabbed Covey by the throat and refused to let go. For 2 hours, they struggled. It was not a fight for victory. It was a fight for his soul. Finally, Covey stopped. He never touched Frederick again. Frederick later said, "That battle was the turning point in my life as a slave. It rekindled the few dying embers of freedom and revived a sense of my own manhood." The boy who taught himself to read had become a man who would never be broken again. On September 3, 1838, Frederick Douglass made his escape. It was a plan full of risk and terror. With borrowed papers from a free black sailor and a disguise, he boarded a train heading north. His heart pounded with every stop. He knew that if he was caught, he would be whipped, sold deeper south, or killed. After many anxious hours, the train arrived in New York City. Frederick stepped onto the platform, and for the first time in his life, he was a free man. But freedom was not yet secure. He was alone, with no money and no friends. The northern states were free, but slave catchers roamed the streets, ready to kidnap runaway slaves and return them to bondage. Frederick hid in dark alleys, sleeping on the ground, terrified of every stranger's face. A kind man helped him. He sent word to Anna Murray, a free black woman Frederick had fallen in love with in Baltimore. Anna came to New York immediately. They were married in a small, quiet ceremony. And together, hand in hand, they started a new life. Frederick and Anna moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Frederick chose a new last name, Douglass, inspired by a character in a famous poem. He was no longer Frederick Bailey. He was Frederick Douglass. He found work as a laborer. He swept floors, loaded ships, and cut wood. It was hard physical work, but he was free. And at night he read. He read newspapers, especially an abolitionist paper called The Liberator, edited by William Lloyd Garrison. The paper called for the immediate end of slavery. Frederick felt his heart beat faster every time he read it. One evening, he attended a meeting of abolitionists. They invited him to speak about his experiences. Frederick was nervous. He had never spoken to a white audience before. But when he stood up, the words poured out like a river. He told them about the whip, the hunger, the children taken from their mothers. He told them about the dark nights and the bright flame of learning to read. The audience was shocked. Many of them wept. His voice was powerful, clear, and full of truth. The leaders of the abolitionist movement immediately recognized his talent. They asked him to become a speaker for the cause. And so, at just 23 years old, Frederick Douglass began his life's work. He traveled across the northern states, speaking in town halls, churches, and open fields. Thousands came to hear him. His words were sharp and unafraid. He spoke not only of the physical chains of slavery, but of the mental chains. He said, "Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave." And he was living proof. But his very success brought danger. Many people could not believe that such an eloquent, intelligent man had ever been a slave. Some accused him of lying. So, in 1845, Frederick decided to write his story. He published a book called Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. The book was short, just over 100 pages, but its impact was massive. It was a bestseller in America and Europe. He wrote in simple, powerful English so that everyone could understand. He described his real name, his real owners, and the real places he had suffered. This was a bold and dangerous act. By revealing these details, he risked being captured and returned to slavery. So, for his own safety, Frederick traveled to England. There, he continued speaking. The British people welcomed him with open arms. They were horrified by the cruelty of American slavery, and they loved Frederick's courage and brilliance. Some English friends raised money to officially buy his freedom from his old master. For the first time in his life, Frederick Douglass was legally, completely free. He returned to the United States, not to rest, but to fight harder. He started his own newspaper, the North Star. The motto of the paper was, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color." He fought not only against slavery, but also for the rights of women. He became friends with Susan B. Anthony and other leaders of the women's movement. He believed that all human beings, regardless of race or gender, deserved full equality. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Frederick Douglass pushed President Abraham Lincoln to make the war about ending slavery. He met with Lincoln at the White House. He urged that black men be allowed to join the Union Army. He believed that African Americans must fight for their own freedom. His own sons joined the army. Lincoln listened. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 declared slaves in the Confederate States to be free, and the Union Army was open to black soldiers. Frederick Douglass had helped change the course of history. After the war, slavery was officially abolished in America. Frederick was now a national hero. But his work was not done. He fought for the right of black men to vote. He continued writing and speaking. He held high government positions, including United States Marshal and Minister to Haiti. Through all this, his personal life was marked by both love and loss. His beloved wife Anna passed away in 1882. Later, he married Helen Pitts, a white woman who shared his passion for justice. This marriage caused great scandal at the time, but Frederick did not care about the opinions of narrow-minded people. He lived by his own principles. On February 20th, 1895, Frederick Douglass attended a meeting of the National Council of Women. He spoke passionately about justice and equality, as he always did. He returned home that evening, stood in the hallway of his house, and put his hand to his chest. And then, quietly, he fell. Frederick Douglass was gone. The nation mourned. Flags flew at half-mast. A man born into chains had died as one of the most respected voices in American history. So, what can we learn from the life of Frederick Douglass? First, knowledge is power. The slave masters knew this. That is why they banned reading. Frederick Douglass said, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." Education is not just about getting a job. It is about freedom of the mind. It gives you the power to think for yourself, to question injustice, and to change your circumstances. Second, never let anyone define your worth. The world told Frederick he was nothing, that he was less than human. He refused to accept that. He found his worth inside himself. He fought back. He held on to his dream with both hands. No matter what anyone says about you, your value is not for them to decide. Third, use your voice for good. Frederick Douglass used his words to fight for others. He spoke for the voiceless. He fought for women's rights, for immigrants, for the poor. He understood that true greatness is not about lifting yourself alone. It is about lifting others with you. Fourth, struggle makes you stronger. The fight with Covey, the lonely nights of study, the fear of escape, all these struggles shaped Frederick into the giant he became. Do not run from hard times. Face them. Grow through them. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. And finally, believe in the power of hope. Frederick Douglass looked at the darkest evil, the brutal system of slavery, and he still believed it could end. He worked for decades, often with little progress. But he never lost hope. And he lived to see the chains broken. Frederick Douglass once said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." You right now are building yourself. Every English word you learn, every story you absorb, every challenge you overcome, it all builds a stronger you. You are not just learning a language. You are opening doors. You are breaking chains. You are following the same path that Frederick walked, from darkness into light. So, as you continue your journey, remember the slave boy who was told he could never read. Remember the man who stood before kings and presidents. Remember that inside you, there is a voice that the world needs to hear. Thank you for listening to this story. If it inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, what part of Frederick Douglass's life touched you the most? I read every comment. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and never let the world tell you what you cannot do. Bye for now.